You hear it all the time, right? The biggest claim in the book, that Jesus guy, he fulfilled prophecy. That his whole story, born where he was, died how he supposedly died, came back from the dead, all of it was predicted thousands of years earlier in ancient Jewish texts. It's the absolute foundation for so much of what people believe. But what if that's not true? What if those prophecies aren't prophecies at all? What if they're just old poems, rants, even curses, completely twisted and ripped out of context after Jesus was supposedly a thing? What if the whole idea was just invented to make a new story look like it had ancient roots? Sounds crazy, I know, but seriously, have you actually looked at them? Really looked? We're going to dig into places like the Psalms that Christians insist predict everything from the crucifixion to, well, you name it. Get ready, because I'm Fareed. This is the Rational Fareed, and what we're about to uncover about these so-called prophecies might just shatter some illusions. And yeah, it's probably going to piss some people off. Let's do this. So let's get something straight right off the bat. What even is a prophecy? I mean a real one. Not some vague fortune cookie nonsense you can twist to fit anything. I'm talking about a prediction that's specific, like really specific. Who is it about? What exactly are they going to do? When and where is it happening? That's a prophecy. Anything less? Oh, there will be troubles. Nation will rise against nation. Yeah, thanks Nostradamus, tell me something I don't know. That's not prophecy. That's just observing human history and stating the blindingly obvious. It's the kind of stuff that can be bent and retroactively applied to literally any period in time. It's useless for proving anything foretold. And here's the punchline. By that standard, the standard of clear, specific, unambiguous prediction, you can comb through the entire Old Testament, top to bottom, and you simply will not find a genuine, specific prophecy about a guy named Jesus who did specific things like being crucified, dying, and coming back to life. It's just not there. So, if these clear, specific prophecies about Jesus don't exist in the original texts, how did Christians end up claiming they did? Simple. They put them there. The people who wrote the Gospels, centuries after these Old Testament books were written, had a story they wanted to tell, and they needed it to sound important, ancient, and divinely planned. So they went back to the Hebrew Scriptures and started, well, let's call it creative interpretation. They took lines completely out of context. They twisted the meaning of words. And honestly, sometimes they just straight up invented verses that weren't even there. It wasn't an honest reading. It was an agenda. They were building a case, retroactively justifying their wondrous yarn of Jesus by distorting older writings. And the followers who came after them just kept the practice going, picking random phrases here and there, with nothing but their imagination, slapping a prophecy fulfilled label on it, regardless of what the original text was actually about. It's not prophecy, it's fabrication and wishful thinking dressed up as evidence. So, where do defenders of this prophecy idea always run? The Psalms, and specifically Psalm 22. This is the go-to for crucifixion prophecy. And look, if you read it with Christian glasses on, yeah, you might think you see connections. You'll see lines like, my God, why have you forsaken me? Hey, that's what Jesus supposedly said on the cross. You'll see, they pierced my hands and feet. Wow, nails. You see talk about dividing garments, being thirsty, bones out of joint? Sounds like a crucifixion scene, doesn't it? If that's what you've been taught your whole life, you're primed to see it. But let's peel back that layer of Christian overlay and actually look at what the Psalm says in its own context. That famous line, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's not the final cry of a dying man. That's the very first line of the Psalm. It's the beginning of a lament from someone who is in serious trouble, feeling abandoned at that moment, not dying. The psalmist goes on to describe a situation. He's surrounded, not by weeping followers, but by enemies he describes as vicious animals, strong bulls, roaring lions, dogs. He's begging God for help because he's in danger. And critically, the psalm doesn't end with his death. It ends with him praising God for saving him. This isn't a deathbed scene. It's a cry for help from someone who expects to survive, and apparently does. Now, what about the classic, "They pierced my hands and feet"? This is a huge one for prophecy claims. But here's the thing. The original Hebrew word here, it's ambiguous. While one possible translation is pierced, a widely accepted alternative, supported by how the word is used elsewhere, like in the book of Isaiah, is lion. Yes, lion. So the phrase could very reasonably read, "Like a lion they maul my hands and my feet," or "a lion bites at my hands and my feet." And guess what absolutely confirms that lion reading within this psalm itself? Just a few verses later, the writer says, "Save me from the lion's mouth." Think about it. You have a psalm where the writer is surrounded by enemies described as lions, where the writer explicitly asks God to save me from the lion's mouth. And there's an ambiguous word describing something happening to his hands and feet that can mean lion. Which reading makes more sense in that actual context? A lion bites at my hands and feet? Or forcing in a translation about being pierced to fit a later narrative, without the specific goal of trying to find Jesus in there, looking at the actual words in the surrounding context? Would anyone, anywhere, honestly read Psalm 22 and think, "Ah yes, this is clearly predicting a crucifixion hundreds of years in the future"? Of course not. So, we've seen Psalm 22 doesn't actually read like a crucifixion prophecy in context. But that brings up another point. Why that psalm? Out of 150 of them, why is that the one suddenly about Jesus? Well, here's where you get the next layer of justification. David wrote the Psalms, and David was a type of Christ. His life prefigured Jesus. Honestly, this is another layer of nonsense stacked right on top. The idea that King David, as depicted in the Bible, wrote all 150 Psalms is something historians and archaeologists seriously question. We're talking about doubts casting shadows on the very existence of that grand heroic king figure, let alone his supposed complete body of poetic work. The reality, based on textual evidence like anachronisms and scholarly analysis, is that the Psalms are a collection. They were written by numerous different authors over a very long stretch of time. They're prayers, songs, laments, and curses, from various periods in ancient Israelite history. They are absolutely not the singular work of one guy centuries before Jesus, prefiguring him. So, the entire premise that these are David's prophecies about his future type Jesus falls apart when you look at who actually wrote the Psalms and when. But hey, let's entertain the idea for a second, just for fun. Let's say somehow you still want to insist the psalmist, whoever they were, is a type of Christ or predicting Jesus. Fine, but if we're doing that, then we have to look at everything else this alleged type of Christ is saying in these Psalms. Because these texts aren't all gentle prayers and metaphorical lion fights, are they? This same writer, or collection of writers, also includes passages asking God to utterly destroy their enemies. We're talking prayers asking God to blind people, to make their lands desolate, to literally blot their names out of existence. Some translations even have lines about dashing babies against rocks. Yeah, lovely stuff. If the psalmist is supposed to be prefiguring the guy who said, "Love your enemies," then what in the actual hell are those verses doing in there? Does that sound like a peaceful, loving Messiah to you? No. These are ancient, raw, human expressions of anger, pain, and desire for vengeance. They reflect the feelings of the writers in their time, dealing with their enemies. They're not some hidden divine code predicting a future figure of love and forgiveness. They're just ancient grudges written down. So let's wrap this up. When you actually apply a reasonable standard for what a prophecy is, look at the original context of texts like Psalm 22. Consider the alternative translations that fit the context. Look at the actual history of these writings and acknowledge the parts conveniently ignored. The whole idea that the Psalms contain genuine prophecies of Jesus completely falls apart. What you're left with isn't compelling historical evidence or divine foresight. It's ancient writings twisted and repurposed centuries later, often through arbitrary selection and imaginative interpretation, to support a new religious narrative. It's not history, and it's certainly not prophecy. It's just religious propaganda. And let's be honest, propaganda isn't interested in truth, it's interested in belief. Alright, that's my take on the prophecy in the Psalms. If you learned something, or maybe if I just managed to make you think, hit that like button. And if you've got counter arguments, if you think there's a prophecy I conveniently ignored, or if you just want to tell me I'm completely wrong, please unleash your thoughts in the comments below. I read them. Don't forget to subscribe to The Rational Fareed for more unapologetic looks at claims like these. Thanks for watching.